one piece of advice I would give you is that it is very unlikely that the high school quarterback, MVP, or cheerleader, or whatever is going to be the most important dot in your life. I would say more likely it's the person on the spectrum who is the nerd that isn't popular. That's the person you should hang around with, because that's the next Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. It's not the high school quarterback, the prom king and queen.
My conversation today is with Guy Kawasaki, who is the chief evangelist of Canva and the creator of the Remarkable People podcast. He is an executive fellow of the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley and adjunct professor of the University of New South Wales. He was the chief evangelist of Apple, where he worked directly with Steve Jobs, and he's a trustee of the Wikimedia Foundation, and he's the author of 15 books, including his most recent one, which is called Wise Guy. In today's episode, Guy shares why he always seems happy, what it was like to work with Steve Jobs and what Guy learned from Steve Jobs, the importance of serendipitous events and why you should take advantage of them when they occur, and if today's workforce is just getting lazy and soft. You also won't want to miss the bonus conversation that I have with Guy, where he talks about how to live a happy life, why you should always give people the benefit of the doubt, and why Guy Kawasaki is always thinking about death. The bonus episode is available for $4.99 a month. It is only for subscribers of Leading the Future of Work Plus, which again, $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year. And when you subscribe, you will get access to this bonus episode with a Guy, along with a bonus episode every single week from one of my amazing guests, ad-free listening, and early access to new episodes. And most importantly, you get the opportunity to support this show, which allows me to bring in more amazing guests like Guy Kawasaki. I hope you decide to subscribe and support the show. Those who have ever seen you give an interview or give a talk, probably at least for me, one of the most distinct characteristics about you is you are always smiling, you are always happy, you always seem to be in a good mood. My question for you is why? Why are you always happy and always in a good mood? What are you thinking about during the day? Are you just constantly thinking of gratitude?
Drugs. It's drugs.
You heard it here first.
THC.
Guy is always high. That's why he's in a good mood. But you're always smiling.
Well,
so what?
Well, I guess I'm just a happy guy, and so that's definitely one factor. And if you think about it seriously, I'm very lucky. And so, what do I have to be unhappy about? And I kind of believe in defaulting to yes. I believe that the rising tide floats all boats. So if you have those fundamental beliefs, it's, kind of hard to be grumpy all the time. And now, this is not to say that my life is perfect and I'm a billionaire and, and I can walk to the nose of my surfboard and hang 10. I cannot do that, which is one of my great peeves in life. But more or less, now I will tell you something that may illustrate my personality even more, which is I am half deaf on my left ear and about 100% deaf on my right ear. Now, you probably didn't even notice this.
No.
And this is because of the miracle of cochlear implants. So I have a cochlear implant in my right side, and this is a miracle. 6 months ago, I was deaf on this side, and now I hear maybe 75%.
Wow.
Compared to normal. And that is a miracle.
Yeah. No, that's true. Have you always been a happy guy, so to speak? I mean, even early on in your career? Because obviously you worked at Apple, you worked with Steve Jobs, who was known as a pretty tough character.
I am fundamentally a happy guy. Yeah, what can I say? Now, and again, but which came first, right? I'm lucky, so I'm happy, or I'm happy, so I'm lucky.
Yeah.
Not clear. It's not clear.
What makes you happy? Is it just you remind yourself of how good things, how good you have things in life? But surely there was a time during your life when things were tough and you were struggling.
Oh yeah, I've had sporadic moments of unhappiness, but generally speaking, listen, I lead a charmed life, and I'm not saying I deserve it. I'm not saying I even earned it. I was born into a low middle class family in Hawaii. Happens that my parents really valued education. Happens that a teacher convinced them to take me out of the public school system, put me in the private school prep system. Happened, I don't know why, but somehow I got into Stanford because I could not get into Stanford today. And at Stanford, I had a great time, and I met someone who eventually, through nepotism, gave me a job at Apple, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
So, and after Apple, I've had, I'd say, singles and maybe doubles in terms of successes. And now I'm chief evangelist of Canva, which is a grand slam home run. And I have I think a very high quality podcast. So, you could ask the question the opposite way, which is, Guy, what could possibly make you unhappy? Because you're such a lucky guy.
Yeah, that's a good way to frame it. Well, let's go back to your childhood a little bit. So you did grow up, I think, in Kalihi Valley, right, in Hawaii?
Yep.
So what was that like? I heard you majored in psychology because you thought it would be the easiest major in school. Is that also true?
So Kalihi Valley is kind of a lower middle class area in Hawaii. So if you're not familiar with Hawaii, Kalihi Valley is the lower middle class. The Wailai Kahala area, which is where the Wailai Country Club is, the Sony Open, Diamond Head, that's the opposite. And but you know what? I mean, growing up, listen, I did not live in total soul-crushing poverty. It's not like I didn't have clothes, I didn't have food, I was homeless, et cetera, et cetera. I've interviewed a person who was like that, all right? So I know what crushing homelessness and poverty is. Well, I know from talking to him, not, quote, I know, okay?
Yeah.
Just like making that clear. So it's not like I grew up and I was thinking, oh my God, you're being crushed by poverty. I didn't know I wasn't. And so I had what I thought was a perfectly normal, family life and education, et cetera, et cetera. And then I went to Stanford. I must admit, at Stanford, I met people who really came from money. I had no idea that, people were that wealthy. And small world, but one of my friends at Stanford was like that. And I'll give you another insight into my life. So one year I went home with him for Thanksgiving or, I don't know, one Easter, who knows what holiday. And he lived in Arizona. His house was on the Arizona Biltmore golf course. And his father picks us up in a Rolls Royce. So my head is already exploding. It's not like I ever rode a Rolls Royce before. And then we go to his house, we go out to dinner. And his mom and his father drove separate cars to where we're having dinner at the Arizona Biltmore. And at the end of the evening, she asked me to drive her home in her car. And her car was a Ferrari Daytona. So my head is like triply exploding now because I've never been in a Rolls, and I certainly never drove a Ferrari. And now you could say, okay, guys, so that just shows what an insipid, plastic kind of person you are. Greta Thunberg would hate you. But I have to tell you that driving that Ferrari, and once in high school, somebody gave me a ride in his Porsche. I got to tell you that those were fundamental acts in my life that I said to myself, Guy, you got to study, you got to work hard, you got to do whatever it takes so you can drive a Porsche. And so the lesson I learned is, it doesn't matter what motivates you. All that matters is that you are motivated.
Yeah. Do you want to learn how to create an amazing corporate culture while avoiding the pitfalls that make for a toxic one? If so, I created a brand new 8-part training video series just for you. In total, it's around 30 minutes in length, and you can get it right now by going to helpmyculture.com. Go there right now before this training series disappears forever. Again, that is helpmyculture.com, and get access to this free 8-part training series on how to create an amazing corporate culture. Were your parents happy people?
Yes, both parents are happy people. Now, we have to be careful here because, happy in the sense of lower middle class, making enough money, able to send their children to good schools, not happy in the sense of living in Mar-a-Lago, driving Rolls Royces. There was no Kawasaki Tower in Honolulu that we lived in. So I come from that, I consider myself fortunate, lower middle class background, not upper class, but certainly not impoverished either.
Yeah. And so you went to law school and you dropped out of law school, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then so this
one of my great decisions.
Your great. So why was that one of your great decisions? Why did you decide to drop out, and what was the path after that?
The truth is that I was intellectually very intimidated by law school. The Socratic method of, they call you and they say, Mr. Kawasaki recites the facts of this case, or, whatever. And, why did this and why that and all that. Scared the shit out of me. Scared the shit out of me so much I quit. That's the truth. Now, there are plenty of people who go through law school and somehow survive. So clearly I was a wimp. But I have never regretted that decision. Although I think I would have been a great lawyer. Yeah. But anyway.
So how did you get connected with Apple, with Steve Jobs? So you started a previous company, right? Fog City
Software. That's very different times. So the way I got connected to Apple is this rich guy that I just described. His name is Mike Boych. He became my best friend in college. And after college, he went to work for Hewlett-Packard.
Okay.
And from Hewlett-Packard, he was recruited by another Stanford guy to come to Apple. So now Mike Boych is at Apple in the Macintosh division, and he recruits me into Apple. So it's really, I'm telling you, I'm living proof that nepotism can work.
And then so obviously you spent a couple of years at Apple, and you became their chief evangelist. And this has been...
that's not technically true.
Oh, okay.
So I spent 4 years at Apple, and I started as software evangelist, the second one. I left as the director of product management or software product management. Then I left Apple, I started a company, and I came back to Apple, and I was chief evangelist. So it was in my second stint that I was chief evangelist.
What exactly is that? Because it seems, and I don't know if you created this role or if this role has been around for a while, but it seems like when a lot of people think of an ambassador or an evangelist, you're one of the people that they think of. So what is that role? What were you doing as that role? And you still have that role now. Well,
just to record history correctly, there were two evangelists before me, at least. One was Jesus and the other was Mike Boych. Well, there was there was 2,000-year gap there. But so evangelism comes from a Greek word meaning bringing the good news. So if you're Jesus, the good news is eternal life. If you're Mike Boych and Guy Kawasaki, the good news is that Macintosh is this computer that increases your creativity and productivity And if you're a programmer, it enables you to create the software you've always dreamed of. So the good news of Macintosh wasn't eternal life, but it was increased creativity and productivity. And now I'm chief evangelist for Canva. And the good news of Canva is that it enables you to become a better communicator because it has democratized graphics.
What were you responsible for, and what are you responsible for as an evangelist? Like, what does an evangelist actually do?
Well, we quote unquote bring the good news. And so back at Apple as software evangelists, my job was to convince companies to write Macintosh software or to create Macintosh compatible hardware products. My job at Canva is to convince people to use Canva to increase their communication skills by creating beautiful graphic designs.
Simple and straightforward, right?
That's good marketing.
What was it like working with Steve? And I know you've been interviewed and talked about this a lot in your books, in interviews and podcasts, and a lot of people always ask you about Steve Jobs, and you've talked about him quite a lot. Is there anything that you feel like you haven't shared about your time at Apple or your relationship with Steve Jobs? Or have you already said everything there is to say about that? You've probably been asked like 1,000 times.
Story, every
Well, you know,
Listen, working for Steve Jobs with hindsight was an honor and a privilege.
Yeah.
And I consider myself very fortunate to have worked for him. He definitely influenced my career. You could say he made my career. And I would not be where I am were it not for Steve Jobs. There's no question.
Yeah.
Having said that, I don't want you to think it was all unicorns farting pixie dust working for Steve Jobs. It was a very, very scary experience because he did not hesitate to, shall I say, call you on the carpet in public at any given time, sometimes justified, sometimes not.
Did he ever do that to you?
So he was a scary guy to work for.
Did he ever do that to you and call you out in front of people?
He never really did that to me. And that's partially because of my competence and my desire to stay beneath his radar. not because I was a perfect employee, believe me.
Yeah. Well, so it's good. So you didn't have to experience that directly, but you saw that kind of an environment being created, right? So you've seen him.
Well, I mean, you know, the lesson there is that if you see somebody hit somebody with a 2x4, you should understand that, you know, you don't want to be hit by a 2x4 too. That could motivate you. You know, it's like a sign of intelligence that you don't then repeat the behavior that got someone hit by a 2x4.
Of course. Well, it's interesting because depending on who you talk to, right? Some people say that Steve Jobs was more thoughtful and controlled and visionary and philosophical in some sense. And other people that you talk to say he had a lot of similar characteristics to somebody like Jack Welch, who would have no problem screaming or yelling and, you know, having a confrontation in front of other people. I don't know, maybe he was kind of a blend of the two, somewhere in the middle?
Well, you know, I can say that I never saw Steve Jobs yell. Maybe he yelled at people in private. I never saw him yell at someone in public. Now, he would rip you, don't get me wrong, but yelling, i.e. raising the volume of his voice to a screaming level, turning beet red, you know, Steve Ballmer-ish, never. I never saw him do that. That said, he definitely shredded you. He just shredded you in a more quiet manner, but he shredded you. Don't get me wrong. I don't know enough about Jack Welch to compare him to Jack Welch. But, you know, I don't know. I mean, in my mind, Jack Welch was the consummate manager, consummate, you know, executive. I would not say that about Steve Jobs. I would say that Steve Jobs was the consummate visionary and innovator. Not necessarily that, you know, he could run something that makes light bulbs and jet plane engines and, you know, completely diverse kind of entity.
Part of me wonders if he were still around, because I think he passed away, what was it, 2011? So, you know, a little over a decade ago. And a lot's changed since then, of course, with COVID, with a lot of the social injustices that have been going on out there. And there's been a big shift in the business world towards moving away from those types of leaders who will
Well,
Right. Well, I mean, so we say we're trying to move away from that kind of leadership. So part of me wonders if somebody like a Jack Welch, if somebody like a Steve Jobs was around today, if they would still be just as successful in today's corporate environment, because it seems like there's a lot of change happening in the world. And I'd be curious to get your perspective on that.
so there is no doubt in my mind that Steve Jobs would be successful today. Now, that is not to say that, the world can handle more than one Steve Jobs at a time. But, I mean, if Steve Jobs landed on an island naked with nothing, he would create a kingdom out of it. There's no question in my mind. Now, that said, this kind of Silicon Valley, let's say,
I'm
Silicon
I'm
Valley
hear what words
entrepreneur. So this Silicon Valley entrepreneur, quote unquote, self-styled guru, visionary, etc., innovator, market maker, revolutionary, dresses slovenly, etc., etc., on his way or her way to prison, yes, I would say there has been a reaction against that kind of person. But having said that, I think innovators are on the spectrum. And so now the question is, what's the difference between Elizabeth Holmes and Steve Jobs? Well, Steve Jobs delivered.
Yeah, that's true.
That's one fundamental difference. So, listen, one of the dangers of the existence of the lore of Steve Jobs is that people have a very hard time separating correlation from causation.
Yeah.
And they also have a very hard time understanding, I got to go into Latin here, post hoc propter hoc, which means after this, therefore because of this, right? And so, if you look at Steve Jobs and you say, all right, so I'm going to wear a black mock turtleneck, I'm going to wear jeans, I'm going to wear New Balance jogging shoes, even though I don't jog, and I'm going to rip people in public, and I'm going to buy a Porsche, but I'm not going to license it. And then I'm going to drive in the carpool lane and parked in the handicap slot. And I'm going to be a vegetarian. And I'm going to travel to India. And if you did all that stuff and you think, I'm going to be the next I'm going to be the next Steve Jobs, what's more likely is you're just going to be another asshole. So, that's why people... That's the danger of Steve Jobs, that correlation does not mean causation.
Well, we've been seeing a lot of, of course, with Elon Musk and Twitter, which I was curious to get your thoughts on. We see what happened with Sam Bankman-Fried, and in general, it seems that there's been a big shift. And actually, I'd be curious to hear your take on just kind of if you think employees in general have gotten soft. Right? Because if you were to think back during the times when you worked at Apple, and I've talked to a lot of seasoned executives and leaders, and when they compare what it was like to work at an organization, 15, 20, 25 years ago versus today, it's nuts, right? I mean, I talked to some CEOs and they're like, if you were to come to me a while ago and say that you wanted to work here and you wanted to have the benefits and you wanted to have the salary and you never wanted to show up to the office, you just wanted to work from home all the time, and like people would think that you're out of your mind. And it seems like today, right, we're asking for a lot. It seems like you can say certain things. You can say certain things. Leaders are scared to speak up. They don't want to offend people. It's a very, right. You don't want to be seen as working too much. You're going to get in trouble, right? It's like this whole other world. I mean, are we just getting like soft?
Okay. You and your audience may not agree with what I'm about to say, but I think a true leader would say, well, if you can deliver the results we need, I don't give a shit where you're working. I don't care how I don't care if you talk to me on Zoom or you're in the next cube. If you can deliver, if you are a great employee, so be it. That would be my attitude. Now, I want to address this. I think that, nostalgia is vastly overrated. and every generation is guilty of it. And let's use a sort of orthogonal example, which would be music, okay? So, like, I don't know what your favorite group is, but I probably think that their music is shit. I guarantee you. I mean, maybe you're a big Kanye West fan, and I got to tell you, I think it's shit. So now, but when I was growing up, my father was listening to Duke Ellington.
Oh, right? Yeah. So was my dad. He still listens to it.
And I said, your music is shit. And then he was watching me listening to Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and the Beatles. And he probably said, you know what, the Beatles, what are these people? They're just on stage jumping around screaming. That's not music. That's not Duke Ellington and Guy Lombardo. That's not big band music. That's shit. So what I'm trying to tell you is that every generation believes that their generation had good stuff and worked hard and were diligent, but now this new generation, they're lazy. They're just like, all they want to do is play ping pong and get free sushi and free dry cleaning. They don't really want to work like we did. But I guarantee you that the people who started Intel looked at the people who started Apple and the employees at Apple, and I guarantee you that the people who started the chip company said about the Apple people, oh my God, they have refrigerators full of free drinks, and they don't have to dress up to come to work. They wear Birkenstocks.
Yeah.
And you know what? There's no clock. There's no clock that they put their card in and punch. And there's no sort of monitoring of how many hours they work. They don't work hard like we did. I believe every generation says that.
But do you think it was easier back then, though? Because it seems like now, obviously, leaders are obviously put under enormous pressure and scrutiny. You have social media where people can tear apart every move that you make. It seems that there's a lot of polarization and divide in terms of like what you can say, what you can't say. There's been a big, this cancel culture movement that a lot of leaders are worried about. It just seems like it's harder to navigate today's business landscape for leaders than it was maybe 20 years ago. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it just seems to me, like I had Nolan Bushnell on the podcast a while ago, and we were talking, and this was a couple of years ago, and he's like, look, when I first met Steve Jobs, and I reached my hand out, and I knew him for a few hours, and I basically reached my hand out and I said, shake my hand, you got the job. No crazy interview process, no whatever. There would be times he would sleep under the desk. Like, we said whatever, we did whatever, we got things done, and there wasn't this kind of aura of like, I'm working too much. I'm offended. I'm unhappy. My employee experienced this. I need I want that. None of that was there. It was just, I'm giving you an opportunity, and we're going to create something.
I know Nolan, and I don't know if this is true for him in particular, but I think this is a very good example of nostalgia is overrated. That, these kids now, they have these places in Bermuda and they spend $130 million for it, and, et cetera, et cetera.
I wonder who we're talking about there.
But I guarantee you, back in the 70s, they were smoking marijuana in the lab. They were taking LSD. They were getting drunk. They were hassling women. It wasn't all, let's just like kumbaya, go to work and create the future with chips and software because we're saints. That's total bullshit.
Yeah.
So I just refuse to believe that it's ever, people, I'll give you another example. So like a lot of people, they think today, when I was growing up, our family had every meal together. And then after we discussed this latest issues in religion and politics and life, then we would go to the other room and we would play board games as a family. Okay? You go find me a family that did that. It's total bullshit, right? So, none of this, everybody on their phone looking at TikTok while we eat. We were looking into each other's eyes. We were talking deep philosophical issues. Go find me a family that did that. I want to see. I really do. I really want to see. What's more accurate is we were sitting in front of the TV with our TV dinners made by Swanson that was in an aluminum tray that we heated up, and we're watching TV. And it's Ed Sullivan, and the Beatles are jumping up and down like they're crazy. That's what we did. We didn't like play board games all night.
When I was younger, we did. I mean, you're a little bit older than me, but I remember when I was younger, and my dad still to this day works ridiculous hours. Now he works, from home, but he would wake up at 4:30, 5 o'clock every morning, and I wouldn't see him until 6 or 7 o'clock at night. And our kind of routine was we would have dinner, not in the TV. My family was very against and I have Russian immigrant parents, so they were very big believers in family coming together, stay away from technology. And my mom would try very hard for us to play board games as much as we could. And, my dad would lose patience and be like, screw this, I'm going upstairs to listen to Duke Ellington and John Coltrane and The Who and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. So I did play a fair amount of board games.
I freely admit that maybe I'm full of shit and maybe I'm all wrong. That's very possible. But, my point is that I think that really people remember things too optimistically, too positively, that, and that everything today sucks. But back when I was a kid, we were all diligent and, there was no voter fraud and politicians were honest. And if they said they work for Goldman Sachs, they really work for Goldman Sachs. And if they were Jewish, they were Jewish, not Jewish.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so you're telling me that, what's the difference between someone like Jim Jordan or Matt Gaetz and McCarthy?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you want to conduct your purge, you're Jim Jordan or you're McCarthy. What's the difference?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure maybe one of our listeners are going to send you an email or a tweet afterwards and give you a detailed explanation. No, I mean, I understand your point. But do you think that today's, like when you look at the business landscape today and kind of what's going on and the shift that we've been seeing, when you look at it from that lens, do you think, well, everything's fine, everything's great? Or does part of you think like, well, what's happened to our companies? It's gotten a little bit soft. We're complaining about everything. We're upset about everything. Or do you just think it's different?
The honest answer is I don't know. And I think this is because of how journalism worked then and works now, which is, we only know about the Elizabeth Holmes and the Sam Bankman-Fried or whatever his name is.
Yeah, no, that's it.
So those are the examples. Now, maybe 50 years ago, just because of the way journalism worked and there was no internet, there were just as many Elizabeth Holmes and Sam Bankman-Fried. It's just we didn't know about them, right? Because of journalism and the limits of the transmission of information, not because they didn't exist.
Yeah.
And so, I believe in science, but I believe science cannot really do this, which is to say, can we have an experiment? Can we have a null hypothesis? Can we control the variables and see, I'm willing to completely be proven wrong and change my mind. But let's not do it based on, an example or an example or two, because we really don't know. I mean, are we saying that John Rockefeller was just a great guy, total mensch, and he was looking out for the common man, whereas today's entrepreneurs, they're just buying condos in Bermuda? Was Leland Stanford a great guy who made railroad travel possible, or was he a railroad baron who exploited people and Chinese immigrants?
Yeah.
So,
there's a lot of.
I guess I'm just advocating for skepticism.
Yeah, no, which is good, and I'm a big believer in healthy skepticism. And if anything, what we've seen with the recent Twitter files, right, when Elon Musk took over, and some of the stuff that he's been sharing is that skepticism is has been warranted in a lot of different areas. So it's
Yeah, like I got to tell you, Elon Musk, I just don't get it.
you don't get okay.
I
What don't you get?
I don't, up till until 6 months ago, I publicly have stated many times that I thought Elon Musk was the closest thing we have to Steve Jobs.
And today,
And I'm going to live to regret saying that. But I don't think he's anything even close to Steve Jobs right now. I mean, and I don't mean that he's in front of Steve Jobs. I mean, I don't understand him at all.
is it the leaking the Twitter files? Was it the firing of people? What got you so kind of turned around on him?
It's the, like, do you think he's racist?
Yeah, I mean, I see. Fair question. I don't know. Like you
I
said,
don't know either, but he sure doesn't. I mean, look at the things he supports, and I just, man, if I were that rich, the things I would do with my money are not buy Twitter, man. I would,
Yeah.
I would have other things that are a priority to fix.
Yeah, I've seen
than Twitter.
I've seen some people say that what he's done has been terrible and disgusting, and I've seen other people saying things like, "Wow, he bought Twitter to free information and to show everybody what was really going on there," and that's such a brave and amazing. So I've heard both.
Oh, so he's freeing information, but he suspends those reporters. Like, put those two things together in a sentence and tell me how it's internally consistent. I don't understand that. And then, this kid that tracks his jet using publicly available information.
They got banned.
I understand why that would piss me off, but what? I mean, it's not like he broke into your airplane's GPS system and is now tracking you. I mean, anybody can go to that website and get your tail number and figure out where you are.
The one thing you can say, the one thing that you can say for Elon Musk is that you know he's making the decisions, whereas I think a lot of the issues, with Twitter. A lot of the issues with Twitter were before is they would say, "Oh, we have this algorithm, and it flagged it," and nobody would actually take accountability for anything. Where now, agree with him or not, Elon Musk is the one who's saying, "I'm not going to have that on my platform. I'm banning this," and so in
that sense
that he's like at least owning the stuff that he's doing.
Well, in that sense, he's very similar to Steve Jobs, right? So. It wasn't a committee that decided that the trash can would have 4 vertical lines and be in the bottom right corner of the desktop. And Steve used to have discussions that the trash cans in the office weren't black enough. I'm like, Steve, black is black. I mean, that trash can is black. I said, no, it's not black enough. I mean, he had those kinds of discussions, but
It'll be interesting to see what happens over the coming months with Elon and Twitter and all that stuff. Remember to go to helpmyculture.com if you want to get access to my brand new 8-part completely free training series on how to create an amazing corporate culture while avoiding the pitfalls that make for a toxic one. Not only will you hear from me, but you will hear from best-selling authors including Daniel Coyle, who wrote The Culture Code, and Aaron Meyer, the best-selling author of The Culture Map and No Rules Rules. You will also hear from Mark Randolph, the first CEO of Netflix, and Jim Heppelman, the CEO of PTC. Again, you can get access to all of this completely free by going to helpmyculture.com. I hope you find the video training series useful. I wanted to shift gears a little bit. One of the things that you mentioned earlier at the beginning of our discussion is you said that, and you didn't actually use the word serendipity, but you said you're kind of fortunate that one thing happened to another and kind of led to another. And I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on serendipitous events, because it seems like serendipity is important. It's a big part of your life. I think it's a big part of a lot of people's lives. But I think a lot of people don't pay attention to it, right? So there's one thing about serendipity, but there's another thing to actually pay attention to the signs and to take action when you notice it, versus just kind of like letting
clueless.
things. Yeah, exactly. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I'm gonna go. I fully appreciate serendipity, but I also think, as you say, that serendipity without seizing the opportunity is a lost opportunity.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So I happened to meet this guy from Phoenix, Arizona, who happened to buy an Apple One, who happened to be very technical, who showed me an Apple II, who happened to go to work for HP, who happened to also know another guy at Stanford that was at Apple. And that trail of serendipitous events is what got me to Apple, and the rest is history. Okay. So now, going back further in my youth, if I had a different sixth grade teacher than the one that I did, that teacher may not have convinced my parents to take me out of the public school system and put me in a college prep school. If I had not done that, I would not have gotten to Stanford. If I had not gotten to Stanford, I would not have met Mike Boych, and I would not be working in the Macintosh division, and maybe I would be in Hawaii, managing a retail store or something. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but the arc of my life completely changed because of that sixth grade teacher. So, but I think one thing that your listeners should caution themselves is that you can look at people's lives and you can say, all right, so you can try to establish this conceptual framework. So, Guy went to Stanford and he majored in psych, and that psychology major prepared him to be a marketer and an evangelist. And after the fact, it's very easy to connect the dots. Sixth grade teacher convinces you to go to Iolani. Iolani makes you apply to Stanford. Stanford enables you to meet Mike Boych. Mike Boych knows Mike Murray. They hire you into the Macintosh division. The rest is history. So, one more little serendipitous thing. So, I became the chief evangelist of Canva because the people at Canva knew who I was. I did not know who they were. My social media person happened to use Canva to make graphics. Canva happened to notice that Guy was tweeting Canva graphics. They reach out to me with a tweet. I happened to see that at mention. Believe me, I didn't see them all. There were a lot of at mentions those times. I happened to respond. They happened to respond. They happened to be coming to the United States shortly thereafter. We meet, and the next thing you know, I'm not looking for a job or anything, but I'm chief evangelist of Apple. Of Canva.
Yeah.
All of that serendipity.
Well,
but I guess one point I really want to make is that after the fact, it's easy to connect the dots.
Yeah.
And you think there was a plan. There was no plan. And so the lesson here, I think, and I'm writing a book about how to become remarkable. I think in your youth in particular, you got to make a lot of dots because you never know which dot is going to connect you. So the concept that, you study calculus in high school, you go to Stanford, or you go to Harvard or Yale, and then you go to work for Goldman Sachs or McKinsey, and there's this straight line to success is deeply flawed. And that you have to make a lot of dots, and some of those dots are going to connect, and you're going to look back and you say, I connected those dots, but really it's not true. They just happen to work out. And the only lesson I can draw from that is make a lot of dots.
Which I think is a fantastic lesson. And actually, that's a good segue into the last section of the podcast, last 15 minutes or so, is talking about some action items. And you mentioned creating a lot of dots, and you specifically said for younger people, it's great to create a lot of dots. What about for people who are not young? What about people in their 30s and 40s? I mean, how can you go about creating dots in your life? And I love that analogy because, like you said, you never know which dots are going to connect, but you got to create them. How do you create the dots? My conversation with Guy Kawasaki continues, and you won't want to miss it because in this bonus episode, Guy talks about how to live a happy life, why you should always give people the benefit of the doubt, and why Guy is always thinking about death. The bonus episode is only available to subscribers of Leading the Future of Work Plus on Apple Podcasts, which is $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year. When you subscribe, you'll get a bonus episode each week from one of my amazing guests, along with ad-free listening and early access to new episodes. The subscription, your support also allows me to bring in more amazing guests like Guy Kawasaki, and we have a fantastic lineup of upcoming guests coming very, very soon. So I hope you decide to subscribe and support the show.